It is the summer of 1940. Somewhere over the English Channel, two young men are hurtling toward each other at nearly 400 miles per hour. One is 22 years old, born in Kent, trained at a Royal Air Force base in Lincolnshire, and he has been flying combat missions for 11 days. The other is 23, born in Bavaria, hardened by 2 years of combat over Spain and Poland, and he has already been credited with 6 kills. Neither man can see the other yet. Both are alone in a narrow cockpit, surrounded by nothing but aluminium, engine noise, and the cold blue sky. In a matter of seconds, one of them will make a decision that determines whether he lives or dies. What separated them was not just their machines. It was everything: training, tactics, vision, fear, and the weight of a nation on their shoulders. This is the story of the two greatest fighter aircraft of World War II, and the pilots who flew them into history. By the time the Battle of Britain began in July 1940, the Supermarine Spitfire and the Messerschmitt Bf 109 were already legendary. To the British public, the Spitfire was more than an aircraft. It was a symbol of defiance, a sleek, elliptical-winged miracle that stood between England and invasion. To the Luftwaffe, the Bf 109 was the finest weapon in the sky, a machine that had already proven itself over the burning cities of Europe. The two aircraft were so evenly matched that historians, engineers, and veterans would spend the next 80 years arguing about which one was truly superior. But the answer, as we will discover, is far more complicated and far more human than any specification sheet can reveal. Let us begin with the machines themselves, because you cannot understand the pilots without first understanding what they were flying. The Supermarine Spitfire, designed by the brilliant and tragically short-lived R.J. Mitchell, was powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing around 1,000 horsepower in its early marks. It was a thoroughbred, responsive, elegant, almost alive in the hands of a skilled pilot. The elliptical wings that gave it such a distinctive silhouette were not just beautiful. They were aerodynamically brilliant, providing low drag and exceptional lift at high speeds. Pilots who flew the Spitfire often described it in terms that bordered on the romantic. They said it flew like an extension of the body. They said it forgave mistakes that other aircraft would punish. They said that when you banked hard and felt the airframe respond, it was like nothing else in the world. The Messerschmitt Bf 109, designed by Willy Messerschmitt and first flown in 1935, was a different kind of machine. Where the Spitfire was graceful, the 109 was angular and purposeful, a fighter built for one thing above all else: killing. Powered by a Daimler-Benz inverted V12 engine, also producing around 1,000 horsepower in its E variant. The Emile, as the Luftwaffe called it, the 109 had already proven itself in the Spanish Civil War and the lightning campaigns across Western Europe. It was faster in a dive than the early Spitfires. It climbed at an extraordinary rate, and it had one critical advantage that British pilots would come to fear: fuel injection. While the Merlin-powered Spitfire used a float carburetor that caused the engine to cut out when the aircraft pushed into a negative G maneuver, pitching the nose sharply downward, the Daimler-Benz engine kept running. This meant that a 109 pilot, under pressure, could simply push the stick forward and dive away, his engine screaming at full power, while the pursuing Spitfire briefly lost thrust and fell behind. This was not a small advantage. In the chaos of a dogfight, fractions of a second matter. A pilot with the ability to disengage instantly, to drop the nose and vanish into the haze below, had an escape route that his opponent did not. RAF engineers scrambled to address the problem, and a temporary fix, the so-called Miss Schilling's orifice, a small metal disc installed by engineer Beatrice Schilling, reduced but did not eliminate the issue. It would not be fully corrected until later in the war, in the summer and autumn of 1940. However, British pilots had to think carefully before following a 109 into a dive, and that hesitation, even if it lasted only a moment, could cost them everything. But the Bf 109 had weaknesses of its own, and they were serious. The aircraft's handling at low speeds was notoriously difficult. Landing accidents were common. The narrow undercarriage, which splayed outward at an awkward angle, caused countless ground loops and collapses, riding off aircraft that had survived combat. Pilots who flew it described the need to be constantly alert during approach and touchdown, maintaining precise control right up to the moment the wheels stopped rolling. More importantly for the Battle of Britain, the 109 had a limited range. Equipped with its standard fuel tank, it could spend only about 20 to 30 minutes over southern England before it had to turn back toward France or risk running out of fuel over the channel. Luftwaffe pilots have spoken of the anxiety of watching their fuel gauges on a return flight, knowing that the gray water below offered no second chances. This range limitation shaped the entire air battle in ways that fundamentally benefited the British. RAF pilots who were shot down over England could often be recovered, treated, and returned to combat. Luftwaffe pilots who were shot down over England became prisoners of war, and RAF pilots who bailed out over the Channel had a slim but real chance of being rescued by the Royal Navy's search and rescue operations. Luftwaffe pilots in the same situation faced a far grimmer prospect. The psychological weight of this asymmetry was enormous. Every mission over England carried a risk that pilots on the defending side simply did not face in the same way. Now, let us talk about the men, because in the end, a fighter aircraft is only as dangerous as the person flying it. And in the summer of 1940, the men of Fighter Command and the Jagdgeschwader, the German fighter wings, were extraordinary human beings operating at the absolute edge of what human beings can endure. The average RAF pilot in the Battle of Britain was young. Many were barely out of their teens, and had received somewhere between 10 and 20 hours of flying time on operational aircraft before being sent into combat. Some had less. The pre-war RAF had not anticipated the pace at which trained pilots would be consumed by modern air warfare, and by the height of the battle, in August and September 1940, the losses were becoming catastrophic. On some days, Fighter Command was losing more pilots than it was receiving replacements. Squadron commanders who had begun the battle with 12 aircraft and 12 pilots sometimes found themselves leading formations of 4 or 5 exhausted men in patched up planes against formations of 100 or more German aircraft. The physical and mental toll was immense. Pilots were flying 3, 4, sometimes 5 sorties a day. They were sleeping in their cockpits between missions. They were watching friends die and then climbing back into the air within the hour. The German pilots had a different set of pressures. Many of the most experienced Luftwaffe aces, men like Werner Mulders, Adolf Galland, and Helmut Wick, had been flying combat missions since 1936, hardened by the Spanish Civil War and the campaigns in Poland and France. Galland, who would end the war with 104 aerial victories, later said that the Bf-109 was the finest aircraft he ever flew in its element: high-altitude, offensive combat. These men were professionals in the truest sense. Their tactics, developed over years of actual combat, were ahead of the RAFs in several critical respects. The German fighter formation, the Schwarm or Finger Four, placed 4 aircraft in a loose, mutually supporting pattern that gave each pilot maximum visibility and allowed the unit to cover each other effectively. The RAF, by contrast, was still flying the pre-war Vic formation, 3 aircraft in a tight V, which concentrated pilots' attention on maintaining position rather than scanning for enemies. Experienced RAF veterans later admitted that the Vic formation got many good men killed in the early stages of the battle. Yet the Luftwaffe pilots were also operating under impossible pressure from above. Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's designated heir, had promised the Führer that he could bring Britain to its knees from the air. When the expected quick victory did not materialize, Göring began making increasingly irrational demands of his pilots. He ordered the 109s to fly in close escort of the slower Heinkel and Dornier bombers, negating the very speed and agility that made them effective. Galland protested furiously. The fighter pilots, he argued, needed the freedom to hunt, to climb above the bombers, to engage RAF fighters on their own terms, to use the tactical flexibility that was the essence of fighter warfare. Göring refused. He wanted the bombers protected at all costs, and the result was that the Bf-109s were shackled to formations that flew at the bombers' pace, at the bombers' altitude, unable to respond effectively when Spitfires and Hurricanes came screaming down from the sun. This single command decision may have done more damage to German prospects in the Battle of Britain than any technical shortcoming of the aircraft themselves. There is a story that illustrates the character of these men more vividly than any statistic. In August 1940, a young Spitfire pilot named Al Deere, a New Zealander flying with 54 Squadron, was shot down over the channel. His aircraft, badly damaged, came down in the water. He was rescued, soaking and shaken, and was back at his airfield within hours. The same day, he was airborne again. Deere survived the Battle of Britain, the entire war, and lived until 1995. He flew 110 combat missions and was shot down 9 times. When asked, late in life, what it had been like, he said simply that you did not think about it. You did not allow yourself to think about it. You looked at the sky, you looked for the enemy, and you did what you had trained to do. On the German side, a pilot named Heinz Bahr, who would eventually become one of the Luftwaffe's top aces with 221 victories, flew mission after mission in the same spirit. The aces on both sides shared a common quality that had nothing to do with nationality or aircraft type. They were possessed of an almost preternatural ability to remain calm in situations of extreme danger. Studies of aerial combat performance conducted after the war found that a tiny percentage of pilots, perhaps 5%, accounted for the vast majority of kills on both sides. These exceptional pilots had sharper spatial awareness, faster reflexes, and above all, the ability to make good decisions under pressure when lesser men were paralyzed by fear. They were not braver than their comrades. They were differently wired. So which pilot truly had the edge? The honest answer is that it depended on the circumstances. At high altitude, above 25,000 feet, the Bf-109, he had a marginal performance advantage. In a sustained turning fight at medium altitude, the Spitfire was generally superior, able to outturn the 109 in the horizontal plane. In a diving escape, the 109's fuel injection gave it a critical advantage. In terms of firepower, the aircraft were broadly similar, both carrying a combination of cannon and machine guns, though the arrangement and reliability differed. In terms of pilot training and experience, the Germans began the battle with an advantage that eroded as the months passed, and the most experienced Luftwaffe veterans were lost or exhausted. In terms of strategic position, the RAF had an overwhelming advantage. They were fighting over home territory with a functioning radar network, the chain home system, feeding information to ground controllers who could direct their fighters to where they were most needed. That radar network deserves special attention because it was arguably the single most decisive factor in the entire battle. Without it, Fighter Command would have had to maintain standing patrols across the whole of southern England, burning through pilot hours and fuel at a rate it could not sustain. With it, controllers at Bentley Priory could track incoming German formations from the moment they assembled over France, calculate their course and altitude, and vector RAF squadrons to intercept with precision. German pilots, who had been accustomed to achieving surprise in previous campaigns, found themselves being met by prepared defenses even before they crossed the English coast. Some of them suspected, correctly, that there was some kind of detection system at work. The tall radio masts they could see along the English coast were obvious. What they could not fully appreciate was how completely and effectively the British had integrated detection, communication, and response into a single coherent system. It was, by the standards of 1940, a technological marvel, and it gave every RAF pilot in the air an invisible advantage that no amount of individual German skill could fully overcome. The Battle of Britain officially ended on October 31st, 1940, with the Luftwaffe having failed in its objective of destroying Fighter Command as a fighting force. The RAF had won, but the cost had been terrible. Fighter Command had lost 1,047 aircraft and 444 pilots killed. The Luftwaffe had lost 1,887 aircraft and significantly more airmen. Both sides had pushed their pilots beyond the limits of human endurance, and the men who survived carried the weight of those months for the rest of their lives. Many of them found that they could not speak about it, not for years, sometimes not for decades. What the battle proved, ultimately, was something that every generation has to learn again. That the outcome of aerial combat is decided not by machines alone, but by the men inside them, and by the systems, the intelligence, the communications, the command decisions, the logistics that support those men or fail them. The Spitfire and the Bf-109 were both magnificent aircraft, each with strengths that the other lacked. Neither was definitively superior. But in the specific circumstances of the summer of 1940, over the fields and towns and coastlines of southern England, the RAF pilot had an edge. Not because his aircraft was better, and not because he was a better pilot, but because the system behind him was better designed for the fight he was being asked to win. Those young men, the ones who climbed into their cockpits each morning knowing that some of them would not return, deserve to be remembered not as symbols or statistics, but as human beings who faced something almost unimaginable and did not flinch. The German pilot over the channel, watching his fuel gauge drop, pressing on toward an enemy coast because his orders required it. The British pilot scrambling from a nap in a deck chair, running across a grass airfield, climbing into a cockpit still warm from the man who had just been killed in it. Both of them afraid, both of them doing it anyway. The sky over England is quiet now. The contrails have long since dissolved. But on clear summer days when the light is right, you can still sometimes see a Spitfire flying, preserved, restored, its Merlin engine singing that unmistakable note. And for a moment, if you close your eyes, you can hear what that sound meant to the people standing in the fields below in 1940. It was the sound of survival. It was the sound of men choosing, in the face of everything, to fly.